Hi, everyone.
Hi, Professor.
Hi, Professor.
How are you?
Good.
Great.
Great. All right. Okay, I'm just going to start by taking attendance. Okay. Kim Min-ji.
Here.
Okay. Na Yun-son.
Here.
Park Soo-jung.
Here.
Song Seung-ha.
Here.
Lee Sun-kyung.
Here.
Lee Ji-min.
Here.
Kim Dong-ha.
Present.
Dong Yu-jin.
Here.
Jo Hae-yeon.
Here.
Ho Bo-mi.
Here.
And Ho Jung.
Here.
Okay, so who is presenting today?
Ready.
Nobody?
Minji and me.
And yeah.
Okay. Are you ready to go?
Yes, but how do you share the
Okay, so on your screen, if you look kind of in the middle at the bottom, you'll see a
Oh, okay.
green box with the arrow that's pointing up. You click that, and then it should show a bunch of different window options. Right.
Does it show?
Perfect.
Okay.
Professor Edge,
Yes.
can I leave and come back? My screen says it's recording. Is it my screen? I don't think I started recording, so I want to leave.
Okay,
and come back
so here's how Zoom works.
Okay.
It automatically records meetings.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, but you won't need to do anything with it. I will be downloading all the recordings to upload them to YouTube, and then I will post a link on eClass if you are really a glutton for punishment and want to watch this again. Okay. All right, if there are no other questions, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm doing the first half of the MOU that we had for our assignment. So first of all, I'm going to start with a short introduction of what MOUs are and go through the vocab and idioms. And also, I combined the parallel text with the thinking points. Because the sentences were rather short and simple compared to the other half. So starting with what is the Memorandum of Understanding. It's an agreement between two or more parties, and it's a formal document, but it's not legally binding. But it shows the willingness of the parties to move forward into a contract. So that means it is the foundation of the MOU becoming a contract in the future. So it's the starting point for negotiations. And usually it's often seen in international treaty negotiations, but it may also be used in business dealings. And the contents of an MOU, as you may have already know from doing the assignment, it includes the parties, the project which they are agreeing to, and its scope, the roles and responsibilities of each party, any kind of deadlines, and how the parties will resolve disputes or violations. As I said earlier, it's not a legally enforceable document, but it is significant because the time and effort that goes into reaching a mutual understanding is very important. And parties use MOUs instead of contracts because it's friendlier and it states a working relationship rather than a formal contract. And sometimes they use MOUs instead of contracts because they don't want to imply a legal commitment, or at that time they can't create a legally enforceable agreement. Moving on to the vocab and idioms, the first one I have is 신의 성실, which I omitted in my translation. The synonyms is in good faith, bona fide, on a bona fide basis. The meaning would be with good faith, honestly, sincerely, truthfully. But in this type of text, we would usually use in good faith or bona fide or something like that. For the example sentences, I have, they have been bitten too often by Congress on agreements negotiated in good faith by the White House. And then there's these people are permitted into the country because the visa stamp in their passports is legal in bona fide, and then on a bona fide basis. The next vocab is pretty easy, 상호 or 양기관의. It can mean reciprocal, bilateral, collective, but in this case we would use mutual, as in mutual exchange, mutual cooperation, and mutual understanding. That's pretty easy, so I'll just move on to the next one, which is 위배하다. There are very many synonyms for or English versions of this word. Violate, breach, contravene, defy, disobey, disregard, infringe, oppose. Using in a sentence, you can say the judge ruled that the doctor's actions were in breach of the contractual duty, or violate. All submissions must be original and not violate the rights of any other person. Or Apple filed a patent suit against Samsung, claiming the company's Galaxy smartphones and tablets infringe on several patents. The next is 위탁하다, which can be translated into entrust something or somebody to somebody, consign or contract something out to somebody. Used in a sentence, it can be used as a common way of doing business was for a merchant to entrust goods or money to a traveling agent who sought a market for his goods. Or to make extra money, some women in the neighborhood consign their used baby garments to a clothing store. Or rather than hire a full-time employee, you contract out the work to a specialist to save costs in the long run. The last vocab is 준수하다, observe, adhere to, obey, follow, abide by, conform to or with, and comply with. The man was arrested because he refused to comply with the airline's no smoking policy. Students are expected to abide by Catholic beliefs. Any manufacturer who does not conform to the standards could be prosecuted under some kind of act. That's the end of the vocab and idioms part. And moving on to the talking points and parallel text. The first sentence I have here, the sentences in the first half of the assignment were pretty easy, but I put the sentence here because it was one of the few relatively long ones. 재단과 통일연구원은 신의 성실로 협조하며 양 기관의 발전을 위하여 다음과 같이 협약을 체결한다. I thought the most important parts would be 신의 성실로 협조하며 양 기관의 발전을 위하여 and 협약을 체결한다. And for the 협약을 체결한다, my partner and I took the same format or structure, starting with this memorandum of understanding is entered into by and between. And the sample MOU went with enter into this mutual agreement as follows and put it at the end of the sentence. And for 신의 성실로 협조하며, I left it out by accident. And my partner said on a bona fide basis, which was nice. And in the sample, it was the principle of good faith. And for 양 기관의 발전을 위하여, I said for the development of both parties, but I think it would have been better if I used the word mutual instead of that. And number 2, for the purpose of establishing a mutually beneficial relationship. Last, in their interest of mutual development. I think the most important part was how you're going to write out this first statement, and I'm sure that many of you, including me, have searched the internet and found and try to find the most straightforward looking one. So I went with that, but I also found some parallel text that we might be able to use, which is, so for 협약을 체결한다, we can say this MOU establishes a formal collaborated endeavor between a party and another party, or this document constitutes an agreement between A and B, or you can start with this memorandum of understanding is made between someone and some organization. And I found another expression or something we can use, which is the last one. It is a statement of bona fide intent of the parties, and I thought this was a good reference. I'm not sure if you had trouble finding the appropriate expressions for this part, but if you use another structure, please share. And yeah, and by translation might have a lot of flaws because I would have done better and put more effort if I knew I was the presenter. But are there any questions about this part? No. Here's someone, but okay, shall we move on then? Okay, the second sentence is 본 협약서는 재단과 연구원이 영분 학술지 JPS의 발간 및 학술 연구에 있어 상호 협력함으로써 학술 활동과 연구 발전에 기여함을 그 목적으로 한다. Number 1 and 3 have the same structure with the part of 그 목적으로 한다. We used with the purpose of and put it up at the end, but my partner started with the overarching aim of the MOU is blah, blah, blah. I don't know, this wasn't that hard either, but I kind of went further and looked for parallel text that could be used in explaining the purpose of an MOU. And obviously you can start with the goal, purpose, objective of this MOU is blah, blah, blah. Or some MOUs would start with the parties seek to or aim to, and then just write the purpose. And then for 상호 협력함, I thought this was a good expression to use, which is the purpose of this MOU is to provide the cooperative framework for party and another party for the purpose of blah, blah, blah. I don't know, these were relatively easy, so yeah. Let's just move on. The next is 제2조 협력 분야. 재단과 연구원은 해당 기관의 규정에 위배되지 않는 범위 내에서 다음과 같은 분야를 상호 협력한다. The part I had difficulty with was 해당 기관의 규정에 위배되지 않는 범위 내에서. Because I thought my sentence had a rather lower register. I went with within the regulations of their organizations, but I thought that was a little less than what it intended and what the original MOU intended. So I looked at the other samples in my partner's translation, which she went within the framework of the parties' policies and regulations. And the third The sample said in accordance with the scope of their respective organizations' rules and regulations. And for this part, I looked at other MOUs and brought up some excerpts from them that were that sounded nicer. 해당 기관의 규정에 위배되지 않는 범위 내에서 상호 협력한다 could be translated into provide each other with the fullest cooperation permissible under their laws and regulations, or you could also go with compliance by all contractors with the laws and regulations that it administers and enforces, or under the laws administered by some kind of organization. There was also an expression within each regulatory agency's regulatory jurisdiction, or you could use in accordance with applicable privacy legislation. So those were the many ways you could translate 해당 기관의 규정에 위배되지 않는 범위 내에서. The next sentence is 재단의 제 발간 업무를 연구원에서 위탁 운영한다. When I searched 위탁하다, there were two words that came up, which was consign and entrust. My partner used entrust and used it like the carry out the publishing activities of the JPS entrusted by the foundation, and then and I used consign because it just popped up, I think, and I just used it anyway. But I want to ask Professor Edge if there's a difference between consign and entrust, because I did search it up, but I didn't get a real solid answer for that.
Okay, just going off of the vocabulary earlier in your presentation, entrust doesn't have any type of real monetary feel to it. It just means passing something off to someone to do it, whereas consign does have some sort of monetary contractual feel to it. I can't remember, it was like the second definition of consign you had, where you give it to someone, you give something to someone and they sell it for you. So I think consign probably has more of a business feel to it than entrust, if that makes sense to you.
So is it okay to use consign in this context?
I think so.
Okay.
You can see in my own presentation that I went fully, like there's some sort of monetary business aspect to it. So I went one step further, but I think entrust and consign are both okay too.
Okay, thank you. And for 위탁 운영한다, I found some parallel text which said some kind of organization should engage a local branch of an international audit company which shall be entrusted with the tasks foreseen in Annex 1. So we can say will be entrusted with the task pertaining to the publishing of JPS. And the second parallel text is similar, using entrust. And the last sentence I have here is JPS 게재 논문의 적정 수준을 유지한다. I think 적정 수준을 유지하다 was the part that we should talk about here, because I don't know, I thought that the register was relatively low here as well. My partner went with maintain the content up to the appropriate community standards, and the sample said maintaining the appropriate quality standards. And I have a question here about community standards, because usually I hear it in like Facebook community standards, like say what content is disturbing or not, but I'm not sure if it can be also applied to applied here too.
Right. So there's pages and pages of feedback I have to go over today, and basically for this particular clause, if you didn't have something that I corrected, then you did very, very well, because I would say probably 2/3 of students did something here that was weird. Appropriate community standards, you're right. That's typically something that you might expect more for like some sort of online message board or something, or online community, but the journal it's a print journal, so it doesn't really work so much. So I did correct this. I corrected the first one as well. So, I mean, 적정 수준, it's kind of vague, but you have to, I mean, when you're translating something, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the author a little bit. Like, not only what does it say, but what does it mean? Why include this type of a clause? So there were some people who said optimum or optimal. Well, optimum means not too many or not too few, or not too good or not too bad. Like right in the sweet spot, you know, kind of like the Goldilocks zone. But this particular clause is meant to set a minimum standard for articles. So what you wrote should convey that this is a minimum standard, not you know, that it's between high or low, or certain is really, really vague. Appropriate is good, but not appropriate community standards. If it had just said appropriate standards, that would have been fine. And you'll see in my own sample where I inserted quality to make sure that it was very explicit that this is what the intent of this clause was.
Okay. So I looked for other more appropriate sentences. For example, the DHB will be responsible for maintaining the standards the service has been accredited for, because you have to tweak it a bit, but it could be used. Or keep the standards of the vessels at a certain safety level. So I think I got it from here, but my translation was very vague. And you can also say police will ensure that volunteers will maintain the standards as set out in some kind of conduct or something. Or if it talks about like the 최고 수준, you could use secure something to the highest standards. So there were many alternatives for that part. And I guess that is the end of my presentation. Yep.
Okay, so good start. Who's up next?
Me. Oh,
Ready to go?
okay. Just. Can everybody see my presentation and hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm gonna start the second half
Hold on
of
one second before you start.
Okay.
Can everyone else please make sure you turn off your mics? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to start the second half of the presentation. And so my partner has introduced me what is MOU and the contents of the MOU. And I wanted to talk about like things to keep in mind when writing an English contract. So I know that you guys might know this already, but I think it was kind of nice to just go over it one more time. So first, you have to be very specific about the subjects the agent who is talking about, because usually in Korean text, sometimes we omitted the subject part and it is okay, but especially in the legal document, it is really necessary to specify who the agent, who is the agent, who is doing what. You have to be very clear about that. And secondly, in order for one sentence to have a one meaning, you have to be very specific about the definition of the word and the scope of the word. So the main goal of the contract is to not get like misunderstood or misinterpret one little clause. So you have to be very specific about the meaning and the scope. So if there are multiple like diverse possibility, then just use one specific one or explain everything. And third, consider using a negative instead of like subject or object. So you do not necessarily have to use this, but it makes the sentence more clear. So any work, for example, any work shall not be covered can be changed into no work shall be covered up. It makes things more clear, I think. And finally, like usually we start the sentence with the subject. However, if your focus, if your intention is a bit different, you can change it. Like for instance, both parties agreed that blah, blah, blah. So the focus is on the parties. However, in the other sentence, it is the intention of both parties that, so the focus is in the intention. So think about like what the sentence, what the legal document is focusing on, and try to focus on that instead of just saying like the subject should always go first, but mostly subject should be go first. Anyway, so I'm gonna start my first word. It's 협약. So in 협약, in Korean definition, 법률 쪽에서는 단체와 개인 또는 단체와 단체 사이의 협정을 체결, 또 정치적인 면에서는 국가와 국가 사이의 문서를 교환하여 계약을 맺음. So you can use agreement, contract, arrangement, treaty, or convention. So I was very curious about the difference between agreement and contract, so I looked it up. So an agreement is any understanding or arrangement reached between two or more parties. A contract is a specific type of agreement that is legally binding and enforceable in a court of law. So in a sense, in Korean, agreement is 법적 구속력이 없고 합의의 의미로 광범위하게 사용되는 반면, contract, you have a legally enforceable binding. And my second word is 문제. So 발생하는 문제에 책임을 진다. So my first initial thought was, oh, I can just use problem, but there are small problems, big problem that you intended or not. So there are a lot of problems that we have to be very careful about. So we can use fault, default, breach, non-performance, misconduct, negligence, wrongdoing, failure, damage. So I pick a few. So non-performance is 책임을 떠나 전반적인 불이행. Default or breach is 책임을 지는 위반. And fault is 실수나 결함. Willful misconduct is 고의. Gross negligence is 중과실. And slight negligence is 경과실. And my third vocab is 서명한 날로부터. So we can use upon signing, the date of signature, after signature, the signing date, the day of signing, and contrast to this, 발효일 is effective date. And my fourth is 해지. So in Korean meaning, it's 법률에서는 계약 당사자 한쪽이 의사 표현에 의하여 계약에 기초한 법률 관계를 말소하는 것. So I use terminate, but there are other examples. So extinct, extinguish, expire, it's 만료, discharge, invalidate, null, and void is 무효. So we can use all of these different words to explain 해지. And my final one is 뭐뭐 할 시, 뭐뭐 판단 시. So I thought, it's okay to use if, but in a legal document, I didn't see many if there. So instead, like in case, in the event, should blah blah blah, provided that blah blah blah, on the condition that, or if the scope is limited, including only in the event of, only to the extent of the following. But when you use in the event, it's like unlikely to happen. And move on to my parallel text. So first one is 적절한 조치를 취할 수 있다. So I choose, my only guess was use appropriate, but there are other words that we can use, such as reasonable, appropriate, of course, agreeable, and 취할 수 있다. Also, we can use take measures, implement measures, undertake such measures, exercise such measures. So we can use all of these examples. And secondly, so like I told you before, like problem, there's a lot of scope, the very different scopes. So in this example, like the document use any neglect or wrongdoing or gross negligence, not willful misconduct, any act, default, misconduct, absent gross negligence, bad faith, or willful misconduct. So, and 책임을 지다 part, shall not be responsible or liable we can use. And if we have to take responsibility on a like financial term, we can reimburse for any expenses, and shall be answerable or accountable. And my third one is 상기 협약이 제대로 이행되지 않았다고. So we can use dissatisfied with the terms and condition, expected to breach or violate any internal policy as a consequences of breach, and if like not properly honor the contract. So there are a lot of terms that we can use to explain 이행되지 않았다고. And my fourth is 발휘하다. So 서명한 날로부터 효력을 발휘하다. So effective, so many of the example use effective, like shall become effective upon, condition to the effectiveness hereof, accounting will be effective, comes in effect, but we can also use shall run from as well. And my final point is 최소 4개월 이전에 상대방을 통지한다. So I think the date is very important in a legal document, but I never noticed how many so many different expression we can use. So shall not give not less than 60 days, no less than 30 days, providing 30 days after providing, must be given within 90 days after, upon 15 days prior written notice, during such 15 days period. And also I picked this one because in the most of the example that I found, there's a written notice on it. So I never noticed, but they're like in a legal document, I think it might be very important to notice how you deliver your notice. So I think that would be important to keep in mind as well. And so my first talking point is 연장 여부는 종료일로부터 최소 4개월 이전에 상대방이 통지한다. I chose this one because we kind of did it, we kind of took the different approach. So first one, which is mine, I said the parties may extend this MOU by like saying, the agreement is giving the permission to extend this MOU if you give notice. But my partner did notification of intention to extend the MOU, saying that like, if the party wants to extend the MOU, then you can. But in the professor's example, like in the event the agreement will not be extended, so he kind of twisted it as so if you do not want to extend, you can. So I thought it was very interesting that we took a different approach, and I was like wondering what did you guys did to explain this 연장 여부 part. Did you guys do it like we did, or did you guys have come up with different approach? Any? No? Okay. So moving on. So second talking point is 연구원은 각 권오에 발간 후 한 달 이내 그 절차를 보고하고 결과물을 낸다. So I want to point, this is I think kind of my mistake. I understand it differently. I thought that 절차를 보고하고 and, so this is the first part, and you have to submit the 결과물 as well. So I wrote shall present its publication result and process. However, the second one and third one all said a report of the publishing process, will provide a report detailing the outcome of the process. So logically, I think TT2 and TT3 is right, but I wanted to share this so that like in a one simple, very simple sentence, we can explain it differently. So I wanted to talk about that. And my third point is JP 편집 및 발간의 제반 사항은 재단과 연구원의 협의에 따라. So I thought 협의 was just discussing the term, sharing the ideas. So I used discussing. But my partner and professor all said like decided, shall be dealt with. I think I felt like there was better because they have some kind of agreement. They agree on something, the terms, but logically it makes sense. So I thought discussing was kind of vague in this way. So I wanted to ask, like, how did you guys dealing with this hobby part? Did you guys use discussed, decided, mutual agreement, or did you guys use different words or not? Okay, move on.
Nobody had something different or interesting?
I do. Okay.
What did you do?
So I here I said that I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. I said that various matters pertaining to the editing and publication of JPS shall be made by the mutual agreement of the parties. And I was just wondering if there's a difference between, or under what context we can use the wording dealt with by mutual agreement, referring to TT3. And
I chose dealt with, I don't know. Nothing else came to mind at that moment, I guess. But shall be addressed might also have worked. I just felt like Kipengdeo required some sort of a little bit more action than simply discussion. So that's, and you know, sanghang or sahang, like issues or matters, something like that. I think like simply a discussion of terms, etc. I don't know. I kind of felt like this was something for after the agreement was signed. Then if something comes up, they would agree to have a discussion and figure out how to, again, address or deal with it. So that was just how I interpreted what was written.
Thank you, Professor. If you don't mind, I would also like to go back to talking point 1. I sort of missed the timing because I didn't realize that was the time for other students to speak out. I'm sorry. But for the talking point 1, I used the word renew. And so the exact entire wording went, the party shall notify the other party of its intention whether to renew this agreement at least 4 months prior to the expiration hereof. And I was just wondering if the word renew might be problematic.
The same question was asked. Wait, do I have it? Hold on. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the same question was asked yesterday, and I think it really depends on the circumstance. Like, if the two organizations want to draw up a completely new agreement at the end, then they might say renew, because that would imply that it's going to be basically a new agreement. Maybe they might change some terms. Extend would mean that nothing will be changed and it will still be basically the same conditions as the current agreement. I mean, that would be the only difference that I would say there is. And I think it really depends on how what the two parties are intending.
I see. Thank you.
So would that be 갱신 in Korea if you say renew? Does that mean, like, I thought 갱신 was, I mean, I would go with renew, but then I didn't know it would involve different content in the contract.
Well, renewing a contract is basically signing the same contract again, right? But it would be a separate copy of the same contract, I think.
Oh, okay.
Extending a contract, usually they probably might have some sort of extra appendix that says that would be the extension, and it just gets attached. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I have a question as well. Actually, I had to ask it before this presentation. I didn't include the word MOU throughout the whole document.
Say agreement.
Yeah, I just said agreement. And I just realized that the original name of your file was journal MOU. So is it okay to exclude MOU?
Well, it's the first assignment of the semester. And some students have pointed out that some of in previous years, students have pointed out that some of the clauses in the contract, or not the contract, but this document are much more in line with a contract than an MOU. So I don't know. The title of this document, as I received it in Korean, was MOU. So that's why it's called that. But I also think it was written up by professors, and I don't know if they necessarily, I know that they had their respective departments make sure that it was more or less drawn up properly, but I think there's a little bit of flexibility. It is an agreement, so I think it's okay.
Actually, I cannot, I don't know the difference between MOU and agreements. MOU and agreement both doesn't have legal binding.
No, well, agreement is not necessarily legally binding, but an MOU, I believe, is legally binding. Is that what you said, Jimin?
I only search like contract and agreement. Yeah, so contract is legally binding, but agreement is very broad term. So
well, I'm pretty sure I have some links from a legal website that goes through the various differences between agreement and then verbal agreement and all of that. So I will post that on eClass for you guys, and you can have a look. But there are varying degrees of legal bindingness to each of them.
Thank you.
And okay, so I'm gonna move on to number 4. So my fourth talking point is 재단에서 일정 금액의 인센티브를 연구원에 제공한다. So TT1 and TT3 omitted the 일정 금액 part. So they say like the foundation shall pay an incentive compensation, an incentive payment shall be made. But TT2 said the foundation provide an incentive payment of a certain amount. I thought this was really good because in a legal binding, like I think we should not omit we should include all words. So I thought including a certain amount is really great. But I wanted to talk about like, so in my defense, I thought that in the incentive compensation, the 일정 금액 part is included in the incentive part. So I wanted to ask, like, what did you guys did? If you omitted it, why? If you put it in, I wanted to hear your reason as well. So what did you guys did?
Well, I also thought about the same issue before translating this part because 일정 금액의 incentive it itself in Korean is very repetitive because all incentives should be 일정 금액 no matter what. But still, when you translate, I agree with Jimin that you have to like make sure that every word is put in the translation as well. So I also said shall provide a certain amount of financial to blah blah blah, just to make sure. But I also agree with you that it sounds a little bit redundant maybe. So I think just going with TT3 would be a better option maybe. I want to ask the professor's opinion on that.
Okay, so first of all, incentive. When do we like incentive is something that you get or that an organization tells you about in advance before something occurs, right? We don't usually talk about, oh, I received incentive after I did something. So according to that logic, incentive is a Konglish word. So if I was to redo my sample, I would perhaps move it somewhere else, separate from the payment, because we don't talk about incentive payment. I think that's okay, or incentive compensation. But if you just say incentive by itself, it implies something that happens before whatever this listing on the SSCI would be. So some people have incentive bonus or performance bonus, something like that.
But in the Korean
redundant,
context,
the redundant part is incentive, and again, incentive here is being used in it as a Konglish word, so I would maybe, you know, perfect world, take incentive out.
Mhm.
Okay. So I'm gonna move on to my final point. So 상기 협약이 제대로 이행되지 않았다고 판단될 시, so TT1 and TT2 omitted the 제대로 part. So we just say as a consequences of a breach are dissatisfied with the performance, but I really like the TT3 one saying that it has not properly honored. So my professor included the 제대로 part. So I thought that this was really great, and I wanted to ask, like, is there another word beside properly can we use to explain the 제대로 part? And like in the like 일정금액 part, is it like when we say we violated something, or what is the like properly violated, not properly violated? It was kind of vague for me, so I just omitted it, but I thought it was really good to use properly. And I wanted to talk about like how did you guys put the 제대로 part in, or did you guys just say violated or breach? Okay. So
I kind of used I kind of did the properly too, but I said have not been properly carried out. So I'm guessing the proper the professor's sample had a lot higher registered than mine, but yeah.
I think in the Korean text they put 제대로 intentionally to make sure that you have to oblige you have to like adhere to all the agreements fully, not partially. So that's why I also included the word properly.
Okay. So that was the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so those presentations were pretty good starts for the semester. Just a few comments. I like the overview of what MOUs are. Now, when you include your parallel texts, I really would like you to have the links, or at least the source of your parallel texts included. Now, basically, there's three main portions of the presentations, and taken to the extreme, they could all just be the same thing. If you just said, oh, well, I picked a difficult vocabulary word, so in my talking point, I'm going to talk about how everyone translated this word and pick different definitions of it. And then in my parallel text, I'm going to look up this word in Google, and I'm going to see all the times it was used in different articles. But that's not what I'm going for. So you should have the vocabulary that, you know, there's always going to be some vocabulary that is challenging, or perhaps some sort of jargon, field-specific jargon. So that should be the things you're aiming for in your vocabulary. Your talking points should be the parts that were difficult to translate. And your parallel texts should take something like a theme or some idea from the text itself. You do a search for that, you'll find a number of documents, and then whether or not they deal with specifically the same topic as our week's assignment, they will all have expressions for how to discuss that theme or topic. Okay, so I don't want to see like 4 different ways of how they use the same word in other texts, because that doesn't really help anyone learn anything. It's just a thesaurus at that point. So there shouldn't be, obviously, sometimes you can avoid overlap between your vocabulary and your talking point, because vocabulary is words that appear in the sentences, but try to avoid having too much overlap. Your talking point shouldn't be purely based on one difficult vocabulary. It should be more about sentence structure or some sort of idiomatic expression, etc., that may have been challenging, okay? On your talking points, when you have the source text up top and then the sample, 2 sample texts and my sample. Now, Minji did have things highlighted, but if you looked in the sample presentations, they're all highlighted. The text was put into different colors so you could more clearly see the collocation. Doing it in grayscale like that is a little bit harder to see. I think it pops a little bit more clearly to people who are, to the viewer, if you're using different colors. And make sure you number your talking points and your parallel texts, okay? That way people can refer back to them more easily. Okay, and then for Jimin's presentation, Jimin has taken one of my translation classes before, so it was much more kind of in line with what I expect. I thought her contract tips, that was a very good point. In my feedback, we will be talking a little bit. There's 1 or 2 corrections that I made to assignments where the Korean text wasn't super specific in terms of what the jewel was. So I restated it in my sample text, not because it was in the source text, but because I felt it needed to be clarified. And that's something that you might have to get in the habit of with legal translation. Avoiding ambiguity, there's a number of corrections I'm going to go over that deal with assignments where what was written could be interpreted multiple ways. And in legalese, that's what's called a loophole, where if I interpret it this way, then it's to my advantage and not their advantage. So anyways, vocab was very well done. I like that you found multiple meanings and then looked up what might be appropriate. Parallel texts were good, but again, I would prefer there not to be too much overlap. So just taking words from the source text and using that to find your parallel text, that's okay, but I'm more interested in like the thematic aspects. And then the talking points I thought were relatively well done. I know that this isn't an ideal environment for classroom discussion, but I think you did pretty well with it. So yeah, good job. Okay, do you guys want to take a quick break before I start my feedback? Yeah? What's this? This is a circle? Grapefruit? Correct? Okay, yes, we'll do that. All right, so see you guys back here in 5 minutes. Has everyone adjusted to online class life?
Oh,
Not quite.
Not
it's
having
okay
to
with
come.
translation classes, but for interpretation, it's pretty difficult.
In one of the Cacao chat rooms that I unfortunately got added to, I don't teach any interpretation classes. I don't know why I'm in this chat room, but I was invited by the chair of the department, so I'm there. And they were talking about how they were trying to find different workarounds for interpretation classes. I heard that on Zoom you can do like breakout sessions where you partner up with people. Has that been working?
Yes, but it requires the speaker to pre-record the speech, and everyone needs to play it separately on their own computers or devices. Because when you're in the breakout room, you can't hear anyone who's outside that room.
Okay. But like the breakout room, can 2 people go in it?
2 or more.
But you can hear each other?
Mm-hmm.
So if one person read it, you wouldn't be able to hear it?
Oh. Like for interpretation classes, we would usually have one speaker and then all the rest of the class members would be paired up.
Okay.
So yeah, that's the issue.
All right. Interesting. Okay, it looks like everyone's back. So I'm just gonna start with my feedback. One thing that I have to say, I know that if you've taken my AED classes or my translation classes, that normally at the beginning of class, I give you your assignments back so you can look at them while you're listening to the presentation and while I'm giving my feedback. Obviously, we're not allowed to physically meet. I don't know how long coronavirus lives on papers. As far as I know, I don't have coronavirus, but I've been trying to figure out a workaround because some professors don't read emails or guidelines, and they still aren't letting us upload files to eClass. I'm not sure if I can upload your assignments to eClass. If not, and I really don't want to do this because it requires me to send a picture of each person's assignment individually to them via email or Kakao, which will be quite time consuming, but if I uploaded the images to OneDrive so you could download them individually, would that work, or would you be worried about other students looking at your grades?
That's fine.
I wouldn't mind.
Does anyone have a problem with that? No? Okay. That's the only concern. Like I feel like you guys wouldn't know, but the culture of GSIT when I first started working here in 2013 was such that students didn't want anyone to see anything they did because everything was so competitive and everyone was so judgmental of each other that it was just a very toxic atmosphere. Like I said, I think GSIT has come a long way since then. So unless any of you have some sort of problem with me doing that, I think that will end up being the solution that I find, because up until last semester, I did have an assistant, but smart, he graduated college and moved back to Czech Republic. So, and given the fact that no one's even allowed to go to school, I have not been able to find myself a new assistant. So I'm doing all the admin stuff myself. I know, oh, poor professor. No, nobody cares. But anyway, the long and the short of it is that online classes are already a little bit of extra work, and I really don't want to make even more extra work for myself. But I do understand that my feedback will be way more meaningful if you all have your graded assignments in front of you. So I didn't even think of that until the first online class I did this week, and I was like, started my feedback, and everyone just kind of looked bored. I thought, I'm used to students looking bored, but they also look like they don't know what to do. So anyways, I'll start my feedback. Bear with me. Hopefully you maybe remember what you did, or maybe on your computers you have your assignments in front of you so you can kind of match up what I'm going over with your assignment. But I will put your assignments on eClass and you can download them yourselves, okay?
Okay.
All right, can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Everyone can hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay, so one problem with Zoom is if you have the volume turned up and Zoom can hear me speak, and there's an echo. So can you, if you have a question, turn your microphone on and ask it, but while I'm doing the feedback, if you could mute your microphones so we don't get that feedback, I would appreciate it. Okay, so a lot of what I'm going to talk about in the feedback, Minji and Jimin actually went over a lot of it, so I will be skipping over some of it, or just only looking at it very briefly. As usual, there's some things that need to be fixed. There's also lots of good stuff. I won't be going over the good stuff. I will upload the file to eClass for you to look at in your own time. So yeah, let's just get started. Oh, and if you haven't taken my class before, if there's something on the homework that I deleted or crossed out, then it will appear in the feedback in red. And if it's something that I added, it will appear on the feedback in bold. Okay, so this agreement is made by and between XX Foundation, the Foundation, and Korea Institute, blah, 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 blah. So this happens pretty much, I've recycled this assignment, I think 2 times maybe. I'm not sure why, but some students, when they hear the word Tongil, they automatically assume it must be Korea, but Germany reunified, Ireland thinks about reunification. It's not, the idea of reunification is not unique to Korea, so don't throw Korea in there if it didn't say Korea. In order to cooperate in good faith and for the betterment of both entities, form agreement as follows. So we need to talk about this agreement. Agreement without some sort of something to denote what you're talking about simply means 2 sides agreeing. It doesn't necessarily mean this particular contract. University Institute of Unification, hereinafter referred to as Institute, on the following items for the purpose of cooperating in good faith for the development of both parties. Maybe this was supposed to be good, I'm not sure. Yeah, I think maybe that was supposed to be nice. Now, here's an issue that a number of students had. I'm not going to read this whole sentence because the main issue is right here. Cooperation on. Now, I looked it up, and I will include the link on the version that goes on eClass, but when you're talking about the preposition that goes with cooperate, the most common, like, if you search for that, you might get the dictionary definition of cooperation, but it doesn't really list which prepositions. It's not intransitive, so it doesn't only take this one. But the most common one, it was like something around 70% is cooperate with someone, and then cooperate in some activity. In publishing, was like 15%, and then cooperate on is like 4%. So I tried searching for it elsewhere, and mostly you get those like English learners message board things, and I don't consider those to be particularly reliable. But when I read cooperate on, something in my brain goes, it sounds weird. I wouldn't say that. But you know, I don't expect you to trust me. We live in a world where nobody trusts experts or people in positions of authority. So, but the statistics on this one website that just tracks how many times certain things get used, says that cooperate in is 3 times more likely to be used than cooperate on. So you can just apply that as a rule of thumb, I guess. To contribute to the development of academic activities and researches. So research is not countable. So don't say researches. If you see researches somewhere, it's being used as a verb. He researches chemistry or something. This agreement clarifies its purpose as contributing to academic activities and promotion of research by aiming at cooperation of both foundation and research center on publishing. It should also be, I would say, in, because cooperate in. That's what I meant to correct there. Let's just do it now. Why? There. Aha. Okay, so the original here said, through mutual cooperation between the two parties in terms of publishing the Journal of Political Studies, hereinafter referred to as JPS, and conducting academic research pertaining to such on the journal. Okay, so research on, you do research on a topic, but you don't research journals. Research appears in the journals, but you don't research them. So it would be really weird if these two organizations got together to research their own journal. So it's kind of an unusual one. So I got rid of on, and then I put this earlier, because even when I got rid of on, it still kind of sounded weird, because you're not researching the journal. So the original here just said, following agreement's purpose is, but we need the definite article. Why? Because following agreement, this is quite specific. We know what is being talked about, so we need the definite article. This agreement reflects the intentions of the Foundation and the Institute to collaborate on the publication and academic research pertaining to. So I've mentioned this in other classes. When you have two things that are separated by a conjunction, especially if there is a preposition that goes with them, but they use different prepositions, then you need to include each of the prepositions that is appropriate for them on either side of and. So publication of and research pertaining to the Journal of Political Studies. The areas of cooperation between the Foundation and Institute do not extend beyond their own internal regulations and are as follows. Well, their own internal regulations and rules predate this MOU. So the original sounds like somehow this MOU or this cooperation is already included in their rules, but this clause is just saying that they can't go outside of their respective regulations in this cooperation. So I added what is permitted by their own internal regulations and rules. It's kind of interesting. People had article, they had clause, some people didn't put anything. In general, I go with article. And then I think typically clause goes below. I will post a link that shows the hierarchy of these. And there are some that are specific to certain types of documents as well. As I said, I'll post a link to help, but I think most people did okay with article. Now this one, the Foundation and Institute will collaborate on the following areas given that they do not go against the regulations of both parties. Why do you think I included this one?
It says that it goes, if you say they do not go against the regulations of both parties, it means that either party have to abide by both parties' rules.
Yeah, the problem is here. So if it goes against the regulations of one party, according to this, it might be okay. But I don't really see a lot of organizations going, oh, it violates my rules, but your rules are okay, so we'll just ignore our rules. It doesn't make sense. So I would maybe put in either party Another interesting thing, areas of collaboration, scope of collaboration, forms of cooperation. I wasn't a huge fan of coordination. Coordination is something I think a little bit more specific, where if you are both working on the same task and you need to determine what order and who is doing what, that is coordination. Simply working together is a little bit more broad, so collaboration and cooperation both fit that. This implies a lot closer relationship and more constant communication, I think. Foundation and Institute shall coordinate on the following points within the boundary of each respective party's regulation. So boundary, it should be plural because both of them have their own. So, and then it also, I think you could maybe say bounds, but boundary sounds much more like a literal physical thing. So limits is also better. Foundation and Research Center shall cooperate in the following areas, provided that it does not violate each agency's regulations. So this is the problem here is the same problem with both. This means that both of them at the same time as opposed to one or the other. Foundation and Institute shall mutually cooperate on following areas within the codes of, the original said, the codes of their respective institutions. So if we're talking about rules or regulation, another term for it might be codes of conduct, but codes by themselves, sometimes you might hear, oh, legal code, but that is a very specific case. Most organizations don't have their own legal code. So codes of conduct or rules or regulations would be okay. Um, can someone tell me what's wrong with this one?
Is it ambiguous? Because policies is plural.
Hmm?
Is it ambiguous because policies is plural and it doesn't specify with what policies?
Yeah, it's lacking a certain element of specificity. Like there should be some mention of, so again.
It says to the extent of without violating. That sounds
That's also a good catch.
Oh. Oh, and also, like, shouldn't there be each party's respective internal policies?
Sure, you could add respective if you want. But one of the big ones is to the extent of without violating.
Can you say to the extent of non-violation of either party? If you want to like stick to the word extent.
If I was going to keep extent, to the extent that it does not. So, I mean, during Minji's presentation, she mentioned, oh, well, my sentences, they were relatively simple, but I corrected a lot of things in the first half of this assignment. So simple does not necessarily mean easy. Another issue that a lot of people had, I'm going to try and lump some of these together because I do have 7 pages of feedback. So when we got to this one that was talking about the fields that they were going to cooperate, so some people said areas, some people said fields, but it should be broken into something like this: territory and seas, and history and politics of Northeast Asia. If you said in Northeast Asia, it's not grammatically wrong, but if we're talking about these fields as they pertain to Northeast Asia, not literally how they are studied in Northeast Asia, okay? Parties shall jointly develop research projects in the territorial, maritime, historical, and political areas of Northeast Asia. Again, areas doesn't necessarily mean research or studies or academia, okay? So I changed areas to studies because it is an academic journal. If we're talking about different subjects of study, we also call them fields of study. It's a little bit more of a higher register than subject. So, and it's not simply history and politics in Northeast Asian territorial waters was what the original here said. Territorial waters means the water surrounding a country. Unfortunately, because of these journals, I know that it means typically 12 nautical miles off the coast, up to 100 miles if we include continental shelf. So territory and waters. It's not simply East Asia, Northeast Asia. Some people had interesting headings. Details of understanding. Items of agreement. But I can't remember what I had for mine. It was something to do with cooperation, I thought. Anyways. When we got to what was supposed to happen, they shall publish the JPS. So in the initial preamble, when you're talking about the organizations or anything else, and you put in parentheses, hereafter, quotation mark, this, quotation mark, you should be consistent in referring to it in that way. So if you add the article before the acronym in your preamble, then you should consistently add the article afterwards. And if you don't, the same thing applies. So this isn't true for everyone. This isn't an issue of grammar. This is an issue of consistency with what they had mentioned this would be referred to as earlier. And obviously, when we're dealing with the article, it isn't the same as changing the name of it, but again, with your terminology, if you are calling one thing the institution and one thing the foundation, don't change it later. And if you include articles when you are setting those definitions, also make sure you continue to do so or not do so if you didn't. JPS shall abide by the publication schedule of 2 articles per year. So an article is typically, I don't know, 10 to 30 pages in length, and most journals are 100 to 200 pages in length. So it's not 2 articles, it's 2 issues, and there'll be many articles within the issue. Now, here was what I was talking about during the presentation. There were a lot of people who had problems with this particular clause. What was it? You know, something about 적절한 수준 or something like that. Anyways, JPS's published paper shall maintain an adequate standard. So for 적절한, some people had adequate. Some people said certain level. I'm not a fan of certain level. It's just very vague. Adequate, I think, is okay. Proper is okay. Appropriate, also okay. As I mentioned during the presentation, optimum or optimal, not really, because optimal is about efficiency, which can mean there could be too many or too few, or they could be too good or not good enough. I don't think any academic journal has ever complained about an article being too good. So it's just not quite the right word. Also, there were a number of students who said theses. So a thesis is the plural of thesis, which is something you write in order to graduate from a graduate school program that requires one for a master's or a PhD. Some people might write an honors thesis in their undergrad, which is also a little bit shorter. That might be closer to an article, but most of the time when we refer to a thesis, it refers to something that you write as a graduation requirement and is typically bound in a book form, and nobody ever reads it again. I know no one's read mine. I've seen my brother use it as a pot holder for hot soup. So anyways, not super useful. And Not nearly as common as articles, which every academic has to write to keep their jobs. Publish or perish is the expression that goes with that.
Professor,
Yes.
I have a quick question. This is just something I've been wondering for a long time.
Okay.
Do the words optimal and optimum carry like different nuances? Do they sound different at all?
I think they're pretty similar. I'm not sure if I can check, but my gut feeling is that they're pretty much the same.
Okay. Thank you.
Also, publish on. If you're publishing, if it's some sort of online format, like there are online only journals, but JPS is a physical paper journal, so it's published in. You publish in a magazine, in a newspaper, in a book. But because of the term online, then it's published on a website, okay? And I think that kind of, in a very broad stroke, handles all of the issues that there were with all of these ones. Now, I'm not sure this particular one, within a month from the publication was the original. But to me, that means we can go backwards or forwards in time. But if I say within a month of the publication, for some reason, it only goes backwards. So of is better than from. And then rather than, I think each issue is what's important. A volume of an academic journal is typically all of the issues published in a year. Research centers should regularly report on the process of publishing and hand in the results. So if you talk about handing something in, it typically means a hard copy in physical form. And I don't know, maybe if the foundation really wants the research center to come and do a little bit of ABU, they might require it to be physically handed in. But in this day and age, I think most of these type of things are submitted via some electronic version. So, and if that's what we mean, then we don't usually say hand in. Hand in is more specific to an actual physical thing. The foundation may take a measure pursuant to its assessment. Now, grammatically, that's not wrong, but I've never said anyone, I'm going to take a measure against you. Usually, they talk about, they take measures. So they do more than one thing to address whatever the issue or concern is. So the natural expression would be take measures pursuant to its assessment. Lots of good stuff. Like I said, feel free to have a look at it in your own time when I post it on eClass. The foundation assumes full responsibilities for editing and publishing JPS. But the entire document before this talks about how they're going to share the responsibilities of this. So I think it needs to be clarified that we're talking about financial or cost responsibilities, or I added budgetary here. There needs to be something that refers to money. Otherwise, it sounds like the foundation is going to do everything. Foundation will pay for the total costs associated with the edition and publication of the JPS. So that's what the original said. And maybe because publication is a THION word, the author thought, oh, well, then maybe edition. But edition doesn't mean editing. The gerund here is what we need. The foundation provides the publication cost, but in the original text, and this is something that I think is important for legal documents, don't omit anything. I wish I was the best model to follow. I'm sure you'll catch me throughout this semester where I may have omitted something in my sample translation. If I do, feel free to call me out on it. So in this case, the translated version forgot to include editing. And if you're providing, you don't provide costs, you provide for, meaning you're paying for them. The process shall be set in a yearly basis. If you do something regularly, you might do it on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, or on a yearly basis, okay? Not in. And those in violation will take the responsibility. Usually you simply take responsibility. You might be able to take the responsibility or role of a person, but it's quite a specific and different case. Either party shall be liable for the damages arising from its breach. Either party. Now, I know that that's one or the other, so you might assume that it's but when we use party, we're using it to refer to a collection of people, so I would say there. Matters pertaining to editing and publishing JPS shall be addressed through discussion between the foundation and the institute and anyone who breaches this duty. So we have foundation and institution, which are not people, and suddenly we turn them into people. There's a reason why the word party gets used when we are talking about either or those involved in a contract. So don't change it to a person in the middle of a clause. You see someone also made a similar mistake here, which I also changed to party. The terms related to the editing and publishing of JPS is, so this is, I know those of you who have taken my class before have heard me rail on and whine and complain and cry about subject-verb agreement. This semester will be no different, but I don't know whether people listened to me or just really improved a lot over the break, but there was only, I think, one case of subject-verb agreement problems out of all the assignments. So fingers crossed that means that we've turned a corner and maybe someone listens to me once in a while. I don't know. The
So,
original, yes?
I have a question.
Okay.
It actually passed, but with you said either party, and then it is not it's there. But when we say like country or government, like we say it rather than there, although they are organization of people. So is it?
Like you could make the argument for it. I understand what you're saying, but because I don't know why when I hear party, I assume it's like a group of people. So I still look at them as a collective. If this is, I'll have a look, and maybe that website that tells us which words are used together more commonly will give us some insight. But I don't know. When I read it kind of feels like something not right about it. So I'll have a look, but yeah.
Okay.
And it could be something like you've all heard me, those of you who've taken my class before at least have heard me talk about how there are certain rules in English that vary from British to American. And I may have also mentioned that because education in Canada is handled on a province by province basis, sometimes our punctuation and grammar rules aren't consistent from even within Canada. So I'm always a little bit nervous about being really firm on these type of things. So I'll have a look.
Thank you.
So, various matters pertaining to the editing and publication of JPS shall be made by the mutual agreement. Again, we talked about it during the presentation, but where I think I had dealing with or addressed, but what was it? Was it Hyobie Dara? Something like that. But Hyobie Dara, something or other. So to me, that there's some sort of decision making process involved in this, so I added decisions. Matters concerning the editing and publish of JPS shall be carried out. Now, you can carry out work or activities or business, but you don't carry out matters. A matter is an issue or problem or concern. So dealt with is a little bit broader and can be used for issues, matters, or concerns. Okay. The party that violates this rule shall take responsibility for the problems followed by the violation. If you say followed by, it means something that comes after, but when you're talking about what it comes after, this happened first, then it's followed by something else. So following the violation is the correct way of saying it. Yeah. The original here said the violating party will be held responsible for anything resulting from the violation. We didn't mention this violating person or in the contracts, a lot of the clauses are meant as I think Jimin mentioned that some of them are, if something happens, should this occur? She had something, momo shi. So some of the language in these clauses are based on a hypothetical or something that could happen. So I prefer to use words that are saying it's a possibility, but we don't know the person for sure. And when we use the definite article, it means it's known for sure. So here, similar idea, but also for any fallout, shall be held responsible for any fallout. So I think maybe if you had any fallout that occurs as a result of the violation, it would be okay, but this is a little bit too vague. And I think that was also in one of the presentations. Don't use vague language. Now here was another one that a few people had various issues with. The Social Science Citation Index is this index that's maintained by Thomson Reuters, which is a publishing company. And it's basically a list. So if we talk about lists, you can be included in a list, or you can be listed on a list. You can be registered on a list. Some people said published, which normally I wouldn't say yes, but they do make a published version of the list, which is this big, thick book. So it works, but it wouldn't be my first choice. Like I said, included, listed, or registered is better. Or you could even say, it's a little bit redundant, but you could say indexed on Thomson Reuters Social Science Citation Index. Should JPS be listed on Thomson Reuters Social Science Citation Index within 3? One thing, if you're using numbers in a contract, especially if there are less than, I think, 10, you should be writing out the full word. So, also, since signing this MOU, but if you're talking about something that could occur in the future, you would never use since. Since only refers to something from the past, okay? As I mentioned before with any versus the, if you say when registered in Thomson Reuters Social Science Citation Index, it means that we're expecting this is something that will definitely happen, as opposed to if or should. These are better because it's not a guaranteed thing. But when you say when, it implies a greater level of certainty, which I don't think is reasonable. This MOU comes from one of the journals that I edit, and I can pretty much guarantee that at the end of this year, we will not be on the Social Science Citation Index. So if you use when, you hurt my feelings. But also for legal reasons, it should be if. We also talked about this during the presentation. The foundation shall provide the Institute with a certain sum of incentive. This was a really awkward one. I kind of let most of them slide, although, like I said during the presentation, I kind of now feel like, now that I've thought about it a little bit more, I think incentive is being used in a Konglish way in the contract, so, or the MOU. So I would say a certain sum or just a bonus. Okay, here's another one where lots and lots of people kind of had some problems. And I think it kind of had the entire clause is a little bit redundant. So what does it say? Something about the 재단 is the 출판사 and 출판 주체. And I think something about the institute.
편집 권한은
편집
연구원에
권한, yeah, and then yeah, 편집처.
편집처는 연구원에 둔다.
Right. So if you look at my sample, I kind of interpreted it as if you have editorial authority, then you are the editor. So there's no reason to repeat that. So when I read 편집처, I assumed they meant it in terms of like some sort of office as opposed to simply being the editor. So that was my thoughts, but a lot of people just believe that it meant that they're the editor. Also, if you say department, editorial department, that's in a big company that has like human resources and payroll and all of that. It sounds like they have all sorts of different departments. The editorial office, you're looking at it. There is no other department. I can't call payroll and get an advance on my salary, I promise. So, yeah, it's not a department. It would be okay if we were talking about a much larger company or organization, but it isn't. And that might not necessarily be your fault. Maybe you had a very romantic idea of academic journals. Foundation shall assume the position of publisher. So assume means to take over, but they've already been the publisher for a long time, so that doesn't really make sense. And then assume the position, it reminds me of like some sort of 1980s police drama or something where they arrest someone and they say, assume the position. So the person leans up against the car and they search them or something. So kind of a weird way of putting it. Perform the role or perform the, or simply shall be the publisher. Might be even easier. Now, there isn't that much left. Bear with me. Foundation or institute may terminate this agreement provided the obligations mentioned above are deemed unfulfilled. Okay. So we were talking about different ways to deal with, what was it, 제대로 이행? Is it 이행? I can't remember. Anyways, there were a lot of people who got tripped up by this with an assessment that it is not faithfully carried out. Implemented would maybe not effectively implemented, or being effectively implemented might be better. The foundation or institute may terminate this MOU if any of the parties are dissatisfied with the performance of any of the obligations under this memorandum. Okay. How many parties are there? Yeah, two. So if I say, if any of you have an objection, please raise your hand. That would be referring to more than two of you. If it would be weird of me to say if not to say either of you, right? If there were only two. So not any, either. The agreement may be terminated by either party when the foundation or the institute deems. So again, this implies a certain, like, that this is likely to happen. But we don't know that it's likely to happen. So again, if or should, or in case, something like that. Jimin had a lot of really good words that could be used for this type of wording. Like I said, these are meant for potential issues, not things that we definitely know will happen. An institution should notify another institution. What's wrong with this?
There's already a party called the institution and the other one's not called the institution.
Right. So maybe it should be the institution should notify the other party, or a party, any party? No. Either party should notify the other at least 4 months before the end. That would be better. Anyways, another institution to me sounds like it could potentially be someone who hasn't even signed this agreement. It could be any other party, a third party. Here it says, foundation shall notify the other party of, is foundation the only person who gets to determine whether this is extended or not? Was that mentioned in the source text? No, and it hasn't really been reflected in this feedback, but one thing that tends to happen in a lot of translations, I find, of contracts that I've taught over the years is translators tend to automatically give some sort of advantage to whoever they perceive to be GAP versus B. So the principal and the agent would be the English words for those, but this I think in a memorandum, an MOU, there, in a lot of ways, there isn't necessarily a DAP or an U. So I think you have to be careful of adding meaning where it isn't there. And then the last one, the parties shall notify the other party of its intention of whether to renew this agreement. So what's the problem with the original?
We don't know what the party, the parties.
Well, if it's referring to parties, it's referring to both the institute and the foundation. And if they're notifying another party, then there must be a third one.
Exactly. The parties can only mean the people we've already talked about. And then the other party, we don't know who it is, but who's, if we use it in the plural, that means both. And then there's another one. So it's kind of the same problem as up here. Okay. So each party shall notify the other party of its intention. So they both have to communicate. All right. Now it's already 3 o'clock. Do some of you have class right now? No? All right. Free afternoon and the weather is nice. All right. Are there any questions about my feedback?
I have a question. So when we're shortening the word like JPS, you had put it in quotation mark. Other than being consistent, is there a preferable way? Like, is it better to put it in the quotation for readability? Or?
I'm not sure. I think generally that's the practice that's used, but I will look and try and find a definitive answer of that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Oh,
I don't,
so, like, is there functional differences between held responsible and held accountable?
I don't think so. I think they're both pretty interchangeable.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question as well.
Yes.
If in contracts, I see words like hereof, hereunder, set forth, like these very fancy sounding words, and I never know whether, like, where to put them, if I should be putting them there at all. Not even really sure what they mean exactly. So is there sort of a guideline that we can refer to in regards to that?
I think now a lot of these words, again, legalese does vary from country to country. I have read some American writings where they've tried to simplify legalese. So there are, forget, I'll have to have a look. I might have the links for it, or I might have to find it again. But some legal scholars or lawyers frown on those words because they find it confuses people, like you're saying. But I think in terms of learning translation, it's in your interest to know what they mean and how to use them, because if you do end up translating a contract down the road and it's from somewhere other than America, then there's a good chance you'll encounter them. So I will try and find something that gives a little bit of information on using them. Like for defining terms, typically it's in brackets and it's a hereafter referred to as blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, herein means the entire contract. If any party found to be violating the terms herein, meaning all of them, blah, blah, blah. So, but yeah, they're not obviously common words. So I'll try and find something.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, I guess enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you next week. I'll try and get everything posted by later this afternoon, and I will have next week's assignment up then as well. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
See you later.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks, Professor. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.